evening, Marie. Good to be with you.
Tell us, how do you see the Philippines today?
There's been a change of administration, a change of president, and yet, of course, Australia's relationship with the Philippines is long-standing and deep. So I'm here in the Philippines to meet with the president and the new administration figures and reaffirm our deep commitment to working cooperatively and in partnership with the Philippines. We've been long-standing friends and we want that to continue.
President Duterte is the first one to really successfully use social media. I mean, this was the first social media elections in the Philippines. He rode to power on a wave of anger and frustration, and that doesn't seem to be unique to the Philippines. I mean, are we seeing a shift of the consequences of the failures of neoliberal democracy?
No, I don't believe so at all. I think that President Duterte was responding to the concerns of the people of the Philippines, and the lesson for politicians around the world is to tap into the concerns, particularly of those who feel left behind by globalization, those who've been affected by the disruption of technologies, and those who fear change. And we're seeing the consequences of that around the world, whether it's Brexit. The US presidential election, or even here in the Philippines. But we're also seeing outcomes in elections in Europe. So I think it's a phenomenon that will be with us for some time. They are uncertain times, restless times, but politicians, elected representatives, have to respond to those concerns.
But there seems to be two waves that are coming together now. Is this the technology giving people a greater voice and action points, and then that kind of anger of the people who have been marginalized? How do you see this playing out?
Clearly the challenge is to ensure that with the benefits of globalization we can share it more equitably, and I think that is the challenge facing governments around the world, that while globalization and economic integration, economic competition has undoubted benefits, more people need to share in those benefits.
There's been this preference both in President Trump and President Duterte for strongman leaders, populist leaders. How do you deal with this as the Foreign Minister of Australia?
I work very closely with all countries that we have particular friendships with, like the Philippines, like the United States. Of course, we will work with whomever the people in their wisdom chooses their president or chooses their government. And it's in the interests of our country and the region that we all get along well and can cooperate in areas of common interest.
President Trump, when he came into power, the same with President Duterte, the Philippines essentially pivoted away from China, from the United States to China and Russia. This kind of thing, shortly followed by Malaysia, has an impact on Asia Pacific, on the region. President Trump then saying that, making a statements about the South China Sea, pulling away from TPP. How does this impact the geopolitical balance of power here?
Well, I think you have to look at all of these events individually. I don't see a significant shift in United States foreign policy at all when it comes to our region. In fact, in my meetings with the US administration, they have reaffirmed their commitment to continuing to be deeply engaged in the Asia Pacific. They have been the security guarantor and defender of the international rules-based order since the Second World War. We have all benefited from the United States alliances that both Australia and the Philippines have. Our countries have grown economically. We've had relative peace and stability as a result of that commitment and defence of the international rules-based order. So I believe that the United States will remain deeply engaged. They'll have differences with countries in the region, as we have differences with each other. But overall, I'm confident that they'll remain committed.
With a rising China, with greater attention, with more Chinese investments coming into the Philippines, with Malaysia doing that, is China ready for this? Can China take that leadership?
China is our largest trading partner, and we have a comprehensive strategic partnership with China, which I think reflects the breadth and diversity of our relationship with China. Of course, as a rising economic power, it will also be a rising military and strategic power. But of course, we must all encourage China to be a responsible regional and global player and ensure that it also embraces the international rules-based order that has served our country so well. On the TPP, it was a trade deal that President Trump didn't negotiate. It was entered into by President Obama, and he has said that if he doesn't think the United States is getting a fair deal, he'll want to renegotiate them. We happen to believe that the Trans-Pacific Partnership set a very high standard. It's a quality free trade agreement, and we hope that the spirit and the principles and the benchmarks that were set in the TPP, in environmental standards, intellectual property rights, labour standards, these can be reflected in other trade agreements, and I'm sure the United States will continue to be an open market economy and a supporter of trade liberalisation.
Will Australia push forward with a TPP-like?
We're still working with the other countries. There were 12 all told. We're still working with the other 11 and maintaining contact with the United States in relation to it. But there are also other trade agreements around. We're negotiating one with Indonesia. We're working with India, and there's also RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, that has ASEAN at its core, and we're very keen to see that progress.
It's the 50th anniversary of ASEAN. It'll be held here in the Philippines.
That's right.
How would you gauge the progress? I mean, it's been a year since the ASEAN Economic Community. Many people are frustrated. I'd love to hear what you think. Where is ASEAN today?
We're looking forward to the Philippines assuming the chair of ASEAN, and we certainly urge ASEAN members to recognise the power that they have when they speak with one voice. When I was in the United States, I spoke to the administration about the importance of ASEAN, the fact that it is a strong and powerful voice and does have considerable moral force when it wishes to focus on an issue of common interest to the ASEAN countries.
Fantastic. Technology. What we've been seeing is the democracy has been impacted by Facebook, by the rise of exponential technology, the rise of fake news. I mean, how is this impacting governance in our countries?
Well, clearly, each wave of new technology has an impact, and governments and politicians over decades have used or feared new technologies depending upon how they adapt. Social media can be a two-edged sword, of course, but I find that it's a way of engaging very broadly with a cross-section of people across Australia. I use social media as often as I'm able, but it can, because of the anonymity that can be adopted, it can be a negative force as well. It's just a question of, I think, embracing it and harnessing it to your advantage, and I think skillful politicians do that.
The dangers, again, of the cognitive bias of people creating the echo chambers. What's the challenge for governments, democratic governments?
Well, cutting through with the facts. At the end of the day, false facts will be found out, and people have to continue to make and remake the case, restate the facts, continue to advocate for the positions they believe are right for the people.
In the Philippines, since the election of President Duterte, we've had not just fake news, but rising attacks against women online, attacks, rising sexism, misogynistic statements. How do you advise for women and how to deal with this?
Well, it's clearly unacceptable. Violence or abuse against women in any form is totally unacceptable, and we strongly advocate against it. We have a number of initiatives at a government level, including engaging men to be champions of change, men to be the ambassadors to promote a violent-free world in terms of women and their families. The internet, social media is just one avenue. There are others, and so we have to be ever vigilant to ensure that violence and abuse against women is just not tolerated.
In your mind, are women in a better place today?
Of course, I think women have come a very long way. International Women's Day is an opportunity to celebrate the achievements of women, but of course we have a long way to go before we can confidently say that women have opportunities equal to men in order to fulfil their potential.
In terms of, again, marginalization and anger, let's go to ISIS. Australia has had to deal with this for a long time, but just this month, a cell was busted in Malaysia, in Sabah, that was funneling ISIS fighters into the southern Philippines. How do you see what's the growth of ISIS in the region?
We are deeply concerned about ISIS and other terrorist organisations that carry out such violent attacks on civilians and innocent people. We are working in a coalition with others in Iraq and Syria to crush ISIS at its source, but we're also concerned about the Australian citizens and others from our region who have gone over to fight with this barbaric terrorist organisation. And as the Iraqi security forces, for example, have more success in driving ISIS out of Iraq, then they will, if they survive, return home. Now, this is where we are working very closely with Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines in particular, to ensure that we share information, intelligence. Our law enforcement and security and defence and border protection people are all working closely together. And that's been the topic of discussion while I've been in the Philippines.
There have been a lot of accusations against the Philippines in terms of violations of human rights, extrajudicial killings.
I have met with a number of human rights advocates since I've been in the Philippines, and I have raised these matters with authorities within the Philippines government. We have a number of programs that we are working with the Philippines government on, particularly in education and the peace process. So I'll be announcing some funding so that we can continue to work in partnership with the Philippines in these areas.
Your last thoughts on the way forward this year?
In 2017, we are in very uncertain times, and I think that will be the case for the foreseeable future. But with every challenge, there's an opportunity. And so, ever the optimist, I hope that throughout this year and beyond, we'll be able to continue to forge deep and lasting friendships and relationships on economic matters, on strategic matters, and in relation to Australia and the Philippines. This is an important year for us. We'll be supporting the Philippines as it chairs ASEAN, and as a comprehensive partner of the Philippines, I look forward to deepening this already strong relationship.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We've been speaking with Australia's Foreign Minister Julie Bishop on Rappler Talk. So follow her. She's on Twitter. If you send any questions. I'm Maria Ressa. Thank you for joining us.